You've now made it to episode 3, part 3 of the Blender tutorial, the basics, where we model a pencil in this scene. So now, in this episode, we're going to be focused on the colouring, shading, image textures and procedural textures that will lead on into the very end. But yeah, I'm going to give you a full understanding of the material properties, and we will also be moving on to the shading panel, where we can go into more detail on shading and all it has to offer. So yeah, let's get right into it. So we begin with having our pencil selected, and we go into our material and add a new material. And boom, just like that, we have a very basic node setup. 2 nodes. Most of Blender involves nodes with geometry nodes, shading nodes, other stuff that I can't remember at this point. But yeah, it's node-based system. It's the clearest layout that I find. It shows you can see everything and how it all connects and what effects lead into the final result. But yeah, this is a principal BSDF nodes, which is basically a method that Blender uses to simulate pretty much most materials that consist in the real world, like metal, plastic, organic material using subsurface scattering. But yeah, it's how we create realistic textures. I'm just going to go through as many of these settings as I know, and let's start with the top. So the base color is basically what the actual colour of the object is. With the walls in this room, it's just white, but obviously there's a lot more to it than just white. There's texture, there's roughness, which is what these are. So metallic, things are either dielectric. There's a word that is used for non-metal materials. So you either have those materials which are not metal or metal. So there's not really any in between. There's like maybe 1 or 2 materials that kind of have a in-between texture, but you either have 0 or 1 when it comes to metal. Roughness is very much variable. You can have stuff like mirrors that have next to no roughness, which just reflect all light that goes into them. Then you have stuff like wood and plastic, which reflected a reasonable amount of light, like 0.4 on this scale, so about here. And then you have stuff with no roughness or very high roughness, such as rock and stuff like very rough materials, basically, that absorb most of the light. I believe that's how it works anyway. Now alpha is an interesting one because it determines whether a material is transparent or visible. It's not really existing in the real world. It's how we it determines, it's basically a cutout. So let me give you an example. So with alpha maps, it's a great thing that 3D software allows us to do, is it allows us to have an alpha map which is either black or white. So black is invisible and white is visible. Grey is kind of that middle ground. And what we do is if we have an image like this, for example, and we use that alpha map, anything in white in this will be visible. So if we line it up, the leaf itself will be visible, and that background that is white in this will be cut out because with the alpha map it's black. The only reason this is white is because I photographed it on a white surface, on a screen surface, just so I could make this alpha map. Basically, when you have an alpha map and an image, whatever's black will be visible in that image, whatever will not be visible in that image, whatever's white will be visible. It's perfect for materials such as leaves. Where else have I used it? If you want to make like a chain, like a 2D chain, you can mark out the metal material and use the alpha map to make that metal material visible. But anyway, you can get in. We're not going to use that for this tutorial, but it can be used. You can educate yourself on it, look up tutorials on where it can be used more frequently. But I find that it's used for leaves quite frequently because they just have so much detail, and they're basically a 2D image for the most part. They're very flat objects. Anyway, enough of the alpha. Normal we will get back to in the next video. Basically, to summarize, it's a 2D image, but it fakes with this certain 2D image map called a normal map. it fakes depth and fakes shadows, so when the light casts on it as a 2D image, it will fake lighting and shadows onto that image, which is very useful for details, which we will use later date in the next tutorial. But yeah, very useful. I'll go into it a bit more. Subsurface is, I think I mentioned before, is used for organic materials, especially human skin. An example I will give you is a classic example is if you shine a light through your skin, red will appear. You'll be able to see the blood within your skin, underneath the skin, and that's basically subsurface scattering. You can see it in food, you can see it in plants and stuff like that, but yeah, it's mainly used for skin. This is set to skin, but yeah, very useful. Can give chocolate and milk a lot more realistic looking texture. Makes it look less like a plastic object, or more like an organic piece of nice chocolate, I find recently. Specular, you don't often change this, you keep it around 0.5. I guess the only time you'd increase it is for stuff like water, which have very high specular highlights, I believe. And emission, I'm going to bypass some of these because I'm not entirely familiar with them, but emission is basically how much an object emits light, is how much light an object emits, I mean. So like light bulbs and yeah, basically that, like the sun or lava, anything that has like an emission that emits light in itself, you would use this. You would, at the moment it's 0 because a pencil doesn't emit light, but if you bring that up to 1 or 6 or 10 or 100 or 1000, that will begin emitting light. But yeah, pencils don't do that, so we will not be using that for now. I've explained what the principal BSDF node does for the most part, but let's actually get down to colouring this pencil. So what we can do is start off by naming this material pencil yellow plastic, or something along the lines of that. And we take this and we increase the saturation to about 9, and that will bring up, oh, let's go 9.5. Don't want it to be too saturated because most materials in the world aren't absolutely saturated. It's very hard to achieve that look. And then we will change the hue of it to match our reference. So let's say 0.1. Yeah, that will do for now. And then let's bring the roughness to 0.4 will be good enough. That's about the roughness of plastic, I'd say, for this pencil. But yeah, let's go back to the layouts, and that's looking pretty good. Now we can access materials using the layout page, which is this one, not the shading tab, and what we can do is we can add another material to this pencil, and let's name this wood. And we'll give it a saturation of about, let's say, 4, and we'll make it a bit more yellowy, so we'll say about 8 there. Now what we can do with that material is we can go to edit mode, select all the parts that should be wood, and we can click on our material and click assign, and there we go. The end of our pencil is looking more like a wood material. And then let's select the graphite part of our pencil. Let's make a new material, name it graphite, and then graphite has it's a very dark material, so let's go 0.5, maybe in 0.3. Let's give it a roughness of 3 and go assign. And there we go, that looks pretty good to me. That'll be the end of our pencil for now, but let's move on to the top of our pencil, and then we'll go into image textures. But yeah, for now we'll stick with just base colours just to get a grasp. So what we can do is we can go to our metal cover, give it a new material, and name it metal. Yeah, cover, that will do for now. And because this is a metallic material, we go all the way to 1, because it's not in between or anything, and we will give it a roughness of 2.5, I believe would look good. Always look back to your reference for inspiration. And then we will go to our rubber, give it a new material, name it rubber, increase the saturation to about maybe a 6, and I think that is good enough. Let's go 7. maybe? Yeah, let's make it a bit darker as well with this value. So about there. That looks pretty good to me. Now we can zoom out and look at our amazing pencil. It's really coming together. It now looks a bit more like something we'd see maybe in a cartoon or a video game. This is if you want to stop here, that's good enough. This is a good looking pencil for low poly work, I guess, or for game engines, as I mentioned, because it's very basic materials. But yeah, let's move on to image textures. So image textures are an interesting thing when it comes to Blender, because what you could do is you could technically just have the base color, type in image texture, and then just plug in an image there, and it will display that image as the material for the object. But the thing about that is that it won't give you the roughness of the material, and it won't give you the normal map or any of that extra stuff or the metallic nature of that material, which is why we go to websites such as Polyhaven, which not only have the image textures, but let's go to this plywood, they also have the normal map, the roughness, the metal map, diffuse, specular. They have all these other image textures that are essential to building up good materials in Blender. An example of this, and I'll go into details of what a normal map is if it will load. So what a normal map is it's basically a very vibrant purplish looking map like this, and what it does is with green and pinkish hues it can determine what angle the light should shine in on this image texture, so where the bumps are, where the razors are, and we're going to try and replicate this for our metal casing. But for now, with the wood texture, what we can do is we can download this plywood texture from Polyhaven or any other websites that give you free textures, and once that's downloaded it will give you a zip file which you can drag into your folder which has the blend file and all that information in it, and then we will click compress, we will go extract all and save it to the same location as the blend file, extract. There we go, and now we have the textures within that folder that we need, a roughness, an oil map, and the actual image texture itself, which is a diff, which is called a diff in this case. And we will drag that into our folder with our blend file, and now we can delete the zip file and the unzipped file, and now we have the image textures that we need. We have the image texture itself, and the normal map, and the roughness map. So that's good for us. So what we'll do is we will take this image texture, which I just, what you can do, I'll just get rid of that for now. Let's go to our pencil, to our wood texture. Let's get a little bit closer just so you can get a better look at it. There we go. So we go to our wood texture, we can either drag it out and type in image texture here, or we can shift A and click search, then go image texture and just plug that in, and then we can open and find that image texture we used. And brilliant, we have the makings of a wood grain texture for our pencil, which is good to know. This is a little bit dark now. What we can do is we can go shift A and we can search hue saturation value. We can bring the saturation down if we want to a 0.7 and bring the actual value down or up to brighten it to a 2. That looks pretty good. Now let's get another image texture. Also, don't forget to save your projects as well. I just accidentally press Control S, which is save, so that's good to have. Then we go search. Let's get another image texture. What we're going to do is we're going to plug that into our roughness. Open up that and find the roughness map. And because roughness doesn't take color information, it takes monochromatic or black and white information, we can go, rather than color space sRGB, we can go non-color, and that'll be more accurate for our principal BSDF, which is brilliant. And then we can duplicate this or search it again, press the X to get rid of our roughness, open it up, and then we can go and choose one of our normal maps, and then we can plug that into the normal map. Now this isn't entirely accurate because this doesn't take color information, it takes I'm going to call it normal information. So what we need to do is go Shift A, and we need to search for a normal map to convert that information. And then we can also with this go non-color. So there we go, that is that. But what I'm going to do is, because I don't like this plywood image texture, I'm going to unplug it and just stick with the color information I had from the start, the wood texture we decided in our color. But yeah, that looks good enough to me. We can also copy and paste this and plug it into our yellow plastic texture if we so please, with the colour already selected. And there we go, it's already starting to look a bit more realistic up close. If you want to increase the strength of the normal map, just increase that. So let's go to 2. And what we can also do is, if you go to Edit Preferences and then go to type in Node Wrangler, and I've already got it selected, but if you want to just select that, this is a very useful add-on. Just go Control T, and there we go, we have a texture coordinate and a mapping node. So what we can do now is we can adjust the sizing of our image texture, of our normal maps and roughness maps and all that good stuff. So now we can make it a bit more accurate to our pencil if we so please. But yeah, that is looking much better. That is looking more and more like a pencil. Now we're going to move on to procedural materials, which is quite a unique feature of Blender. You can make materials just using textures that are not only not bound by just a image, but they're infinitely large and they're infinitely ranging, so you won't get repeating patterns. But they have so much versatility if you know what you're doing, and it can look complicated. Let's go to the shading thing. They can get quite crowded with their node systems, and it's hard to grasp what each slider does. But I promise I've recently got into it, and the potential for them is quite impressive. I've worked on them recently, and I've managed to achieve a lava texture, a rusty metal texture, a wood bark texture, a plywood texture, which is what we're going to be using for our pencil, a iteration, a version of plywood. So let's get right into that. Before I continue, if you want to see how procedural materials are made, carry on with this video. Otherwise, skip to the next one, and I'll show you in the next video how we make this metal material look more like our reference. Make those indents, make those details. But if you want to stick around for this procedural texture, feel free to do so. The first thing we're going to do is going to delete all our previous image texture stuff in the pencil yellow plastic and the wood texture. So delete all that. And now we're going to begin building out our procedural material node tree. So procedural textures look a little bit like this. They often have color ramps instead of normal maps. They have bump maps because it's not image information. It's texture, noise texture information, or Musgrave texture information. But yeah, so there's all sorts of procedural textures such as noise, Musgrave, cloud, magic texture, I believe. But they all have their own they have their own capabilities, and they're brilliant. They're brilliant. So let's get right into it. So using this reference, I'm always going to resort back to this because this is actually what the wood texture is made up of. I'll begin by adding the Musgrave and the noise texture. Shift A, Musgrave texture, and let's just preview this so you get an idea of what this looks like. So plug that into the surface. So it looks something a little bit like that. It's black and white. It's non-color information. And let's add in a noise texture, and that looks a little something like that, almost like static. But yeah, so we plug the height into the vector, I believe, and using Node Wrangler we can go Control T, and now we have that as a mapping node. And then what we can do is we will move this across. And something you will use quite frequently with Principal BFDS and specifically procedural textures is a color ramp. It's a very useful tool. So let's go color ramp, and it's American, so it's COLOR. But yeah, anyway, this is a very useful node. I use it quite frequently for most things. It's just yeah, it's very useful. So we'll duplicate that a few times. And then we will also include a bump vector. Oh yes, that's what the purple data is a vector, which I'm not entirely sure how it's applied, but yeah, that's the sort of information it uses. But yeah, anyway, let's plug in the color into the normal, color into that, and color into that. Now what this will result in is this sort of funny texture. Plug it into the roughness, and then we will plug it into the color. Brilliant. So now we have this kind of cartoony wibbly wobbly effect. Let's start with the bump, shall we? So let's decrease this to 0.1 on distance and 0.1 on strength. We don't want it to be too obvious, too much protruding. And with roughness, black is considered very shiny and reflective, so we want to make this more like a 0.3, which is not as reflective. And then we want to tap this arrow and make it not so white is considered very rough. Yeah, let's bring that down to 0.4. And we'll get to this color base in a moment. But now let's tweak the settings of the noise and the Musgrave texture. So using my reference, I found high detail of 10 and detail of 4 was good. So 4 and 10, that's done a little something. Distortion, that was a 0.5. Scale was a 3. Scale was a 1. 0.8. Well, I've set this as a 4D texture, so it has more dimension to it, so we can also do that here if we like. Oh, the roughness, that's higher. Oh, detail to 10. Didn't set that before. That's already looking a little bit better, a bit more like a wood texture. Let's check. Oh, also, I'm not meant to plug it into the normal, I was meant to plug it into the height. There we go. That makes more sense for the procedural material. So let's scale this down a little bit and scale that down a little bit. Ooh, too much. Something like that. And yeah, the x-axis. To make this less blobby wood, we can make it more... Oh, we also plug in, rather than generated, we plug it and set the vector as object. There we go. And then we increase the x-axis value to about, let's say, 8. Just to give it that more plywood texture, the more longer grains. And I think that is it for the most part. Let's maybe bring this down to about a 6. And the reason I'm referencing a previous nose tree is because I struggle to remember these little details, these little things. It's really just about experimentation and seeing what works and what doesn't. But yeah, it's just a reminder. Even like the professionals will have something they can work off, because it's hard to contain all these details in all at once. But yeah, anyway, let's move on to this color ramp for the base color. So what we can do is we can set this to something quite dark. Now it's just all pitch black because it has no other color information to work with. And let's set this one to something brighter, and let's give it some color. Let's go 0.3. And then let's maybe change the hue to something a little bit more yellow, like a 1. And then we can add in another color, just like that. And let's change this to, let's select that and change the color to, let's make this a bit more vibrant. Let's change that to something like that. Yeah, that looks pretty good. That looks like a nice wood grain texture to me. I think that's it. That's our procedural material done. Just like that, you've made a wood texture without actually needing to leave Blender at all, which is brilliant. It's very useful. So what we can do now is we can copy all of this, go copy, go to our yellow pencil plastic material and click paste. And then what we can do is, we don't necessarily need this wood texture. We can just plug that into our roughness there, plug that into our normal there, and now we have a wood grain on our pencil handle, I guess you would call this. Let's decrease this X scale to 1 maybe, and that looks pretty good to me. Let's maybe increase, yeah, that looks cool. Let's go 10. Yeah, that looks good to me. Let's Yep, auto smooth. And let's make it a bit more shinier. So let's bring this down to 3, and we'll bring this down to 2, because like before, the darker something is, the more reflective it is, or the less rough it is, and the more white it is, the more rough it is. I hope I got that the right way around. But yeah, we can stay with this yellow base color, or we can, in fact, use the eyedropper tool and use that same yellow. Let's take that, let's use the eyedropper tool, but let's make this one a bit darker, so about 5, like that, and then we can plug that into the base color, and that will give it a bit more grey. Ooh, that's a bit too much. That's what we can do to get rid of less blacks is we can move this slider a bit more towards the black to decrease the amount of black colour is within the base colour. Yeah, something like that. That looks good enough to me. But yeah, that is the wood grain applied to our pencil, all procedurally done in Blender. And yeah, we only needed 5 nodes and a mapping node to make that. It can get really complicated. You can have another principal BSDF with this different material, so you have like a plastic material with like dented out metal that you can see underneath that plastic. It can get really interesting. You can have like rust and all sorts. But yeah, anyway, that is it, I believe, and I think we can call it there on this part of our tutorial series. So yeah, in the next episode we will go over the details of making our metal casing something that looks more like the reference. We'll start making our markings on it. And also, as another detail, we will try and write our name along the edge of the pencil just to make it more personalised to the creators of the pencil, which is hopefully you lot. But yeah, anyway, I'll see you in the next episode.